Before this video begins, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my channel members, who you can see on screen now. Become a member by hitting the join button and get your name here among other awards today. Hello there and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are taking a look at some more of the slowest cars featured here in Forza Motorsport 7. We begin with the 1972 Land Rover Series 3, 62 horsepower, 103 foot-pound torque, 3,097 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful car here today, and you don't need me to tell you that that is an abysmal power-to-weight ratio. Granted, while it does have the least amount of power here, the Land Rover Series 3 is at least one of the cooler looking cars here today. I actually kind of like the aesthetic of these older Land Rovers. Of course, the Series 3 would sort of serve as the later basis for the Defender model, which would come after it. I believe the Series 3 was the first Land Rover to move the lights from the grille, or at least the main lights, and to move them all of them out to the outsides, to the fenders, which would again be an iconic part of the Defender's look. Yeah, pretty interesting car, a really cool looking car, and one that you can actually do a decent amount of modification to. You can make this thing into a right mentalist machine if you stick a V8 in it and 1,000 horsepower, as the game allows you to do. However, the version we're dealing with here today is the version with the stock engine, which I believe is some form of Rover-based 4-cylinder unit, and it ain't quick. The one advantage of a car being sort of as slow as this one is you can't really develop that many issues with a car like this. Because it's so slow, because you can barely get any speed up around the corners, actually finding a handling issue with this is rather difficult, especially considering this is an all-wheel drive car. And all-wheel drive cars usually are the most solid handling of everything that you can get in this game. As far as this one goes, the only real complaint I've got is it's very soft, although that is kind of part of the entertainment factor, I guess. You sort of go through corners and it leans in. It's quite funny. From interior view, it almost looks like the car's at a 45-degree angle half the time when you're going around corners. It's great fun. Yeah, not a bad car though, certainly. One of the better driving ones here today, and that's for certain. Certainly better driving than this. This is the 1940 Ford Deluxe, 85 horsepower, 155 foot-pound torque, 2,970 pounds of weight. Those are quite weird figures. The sort of torque figure on this is almost like a diesel, in the sense that it's sort of overtaking the horsepower so much. This being a Ford Deluxe means this is the third and final Ford Deluxe to take on the course. Of course, we've had the Ford Super Deluxe Station Wagon and the classic 1932's Ford Deluxe. This particular 1940 version probably being my least favourite of all of the Ford Deluxes. I've never really been a fan of the way this thing looks. I kind of like the two-tone. Beyond that, I'm not really a huge fan of the aesthetic of it. This car's actually been in Forza for a while though, ever since Forza Motorsport 4 is when the Ford Deluxe was first introduced. It came back through Motorsport 5 and it's been with us pretty much ever since, although the Horizon games may differ. Again, this is sort of another car where, sort of like the Land Rover, most people will probably know this for being crazy when you stick a NASCAR engine in it and you can leave all the stock internals and crash yourself into a wall. But no, this version is dealing with its standard engine, which I believe is some form of V8. As far as it goes to drive, it is kind of awkward. These sort of 40s, 50s cars, especially in the American variety, are this sort of really weird mismatch. They've got softish suspension, but it's a little bit finicky. They've got diffs that like to spin up and lock on one wheel. They're just not great handling cars. I mean, this is never going to be a great handling car, no matter how much, you know, race tyres and roll cages you throw at it. The Ford Deluxe is not going to be a handling god. So I can hardly say I was surprised by the fact that this is a little bit of an awkward vehicle to chuck around. Next up, we have not a car. This is a 1983 GMC Vandura, 165 horsepower, 275 foot-pound torque, 5,049 pounds of weight. This is the torquiest car here today, and it also is the heaviest by quite a margin as well. Again, it's sort of the only van we've got here. Not the only commercial vehicle. We'll come back to that later. But yes, the only van. One of two vans, I believe, that are in this particular game. There is this, and of course the Ford Transit Super Sport van. Horizon 4 recently introduced a couple of different vans, including the Mark 1 Transit, and there's a few other bits and bobs as well. The GMC Vandura has always been a vehicle I've sort of liked. Again, this is another Forza Motorsport 4 edition, most famous for being the chariots of the A-Team, of course. But the GMC Vandura, it's got kind of that cool look to it. I believe these were used as government vans and all sorts. So yeah, they've got quite a cool sort of almost mean-looking aesthetic, and this would be the basis for the burrito in Grand Theft Auto games, and that is a van that I absolutely adore. That is a great-looking van. As far as this one goes to drive, well, it's got very long gears. That's for certain. Again, this is standard engine. Everything here is standard, obviously. But this is, much like the Ford Deluxe, another V8 powered vehicle. I believe it's a 5-litre V8 of some description in this vehicle. Torque figure's actually pretty decent on it. Again, almost diesel in the torque overtaking the power figures. But yeah, long gears, but it's actually a decent handling thing. I've seen these built up as race cars before, and they don't actually do quite as terribly as you'd expect. And unlike in Motorsport 4, there's no rollover risk with the Vandura, so that's always a bonus. Next up, we have the 1949 Mercury Coupe, a 110 horsepower, 200 foot-pound torque, 3,375 pounds of weight. Another V8 powered vehicle here. And yeah, another one that has a torque figure which is insanely high. It seems the American way of making V8s back in the day was just make them as torquey as possible, which I guess makes up for the lack of power. Torque is sort of your pulling power, so sure. The Mercury Coupe was introduced in Forza Horizon 2, and yeah, I kind of like it. It's to a lot of people, it serves as the spiritual successor to the Hudson Hornet, a car which would actually return very recently in Forza Horizon 4. It's got a sort of same sleek coupe lines to it. I really like these skirted rear wheels. I'm a sucker for those for whatever reason. It's quite a nice looking car aesthetically. Driving wise, it's never quite been the best. It is kind of similar to the Luxe in the sense that it's always been a little bit of an awkward car to drive. As far as it went in this application, well, the differential is pretty poor. You can sort of see it occasionally as you're going around corners. It does like to just spin one wheel on its own. But other than that, it's actually a decent handling vehicle. I would take this over the Ford Deluxe and probably the other Ford Deluxes as well, the other cars in that series. I'm not actually sure if this car shares anything with the Deluxe. Mercury, of course, is the premium version of Ford, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's some shared internals here. But yeah, they do look kind of similar. But yeah, the Mercury Coupe, decent enough handling vehicle. I would probably go with the Vandura over this personally, but yeah, a solid enough car. One that did sort of surprise me in just how solid it is. Next up, we have the 1980 Subaru BRAT GL, 69 horsepower, nice, 84 foot-pound torque, and 2,061 pounds of weight. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe this might be the lightest all-wheel drive car in the entire game. 2,061 pounds is underneath a ton, which is pretty insane for a pickup truck, or rather more acutely for this, a pickup truck with 4 seats. Granted, those 4 seats are in the back, and the Subaru BRAT was not so much a truck as it was a station wagon that was literally just chop the arse end of it off and replace it with a bed, which is literally what Subaru did. But still, you know, it is a truck, it is all-wheel drive, and it's insanely light. Probably quite a bit of fun when you chuck a different engine in it, although I haven't done that for a long, long while. These would probably be quite fun in a spec race, actually, just thinking about that. Anyways, the Subaru BRAT, probably my favourite handling car here today, one of 2 of them. We'll get onto that in a second. It is a very good handling vehicle, this. And of course, as I spoke about when we was driving the Land Rover, all-wheel drive does sort of protect you from some of the issues that come with driving these sort of older, less powerful, less advanced vehicles, because they're not really going to get diff lock, or they're not going to spin one wheel because they're all-wheel drive. So yeah, the BRAT was a pretty excellent handling car. Slow, definitely slow. There's no doubting the fact that this is not a quick vehicle in any regard whatsoever. But it is quite cool, and I kind of like the fact that if you look through the corners, it sort of almost looks like it goes on 3 wheels, which is quite marvellous. Yeah, a car I really, really did enjoy. Next up, we have the 1970 Honda S800, 70 horsepower, 48 foot-pound torque, 1,565 pounds of weight. That makes this the least torquey car here today by a large, large margin. In fact, the Subaru BRAT is the second least torqueyest, and I believe it has almost double the amount of torque this has. And it is the lightest car by quite a margin as well. Also the dinkiest. I've been looking forward to driving the Honda S800 for a long time now, just because of how minute it is. I remember this got introduced in Forza Horizon 3, and I was super excited about it, probably one of the only people who was. The S800 does have some popularity thanks to Gran Turismo. Of course, this car was featured in the 4th game. There was a racing car version of this, which was actually pretty good. But beyond that, not many people know about the S800. Of course, this was the predecessor to the legendary Honda S2000, which would come out many years later. This one does actually have some hallmarks of that car. It sounds almost kind of similar, and the absolute lack of torque is also another similarity. As far as this car goes to drive, well, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. This is a fantastic car to drive. I love driving this thing. It's sort of so fun and chuckable. It is great fun, as you'd expect by looking at it. The only holdback of this car is, unfortunately, the differential does like to produce one-tire fires every now and again. But if you upgraded the diff in this, it would be a phenomenal driving car. Again, sort of like the BRAT, a spec series of these would be rather fun to do, I think. And you wouldn't really have to worry about people bashing into each other because the S800 is so tiny. Yeah, a rather excellent car to drive. And finally today, a not so excellent car to drive. Although it's not really a car, it's a truck. It's the 1956 Ford F100, 173 horsepower, 260 foot-pounds torque, 3,325 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today, although only by 8 horsepower over the GMC Vandura, the second of our commercialized vehicles. The Ford F100, I'm not 100% on this, but I believe this is sort of the first generation of the F100 truck. A truck that would sort of go on to revolutionize the world. The F100 would later become the F150, which is, I believe at the time of recording this, still one of the highest selling vehicles in the entire world, despite only being sold in North America. The F100 of 56 here does have a rather classic look to it. I actually had a model of these as a kid when I didn't even know. In fact, I think it's over there somewhere. Anyways, it also comes in fantastic colours. However, that is where all my praise for the F100 will stop. Because while it is surprisingly quick, I will give it that, it is actually quite quick, it is horrifically awful to drive, unsurprisingly so. I drove one of these modified for a series way back when, and it was terrible to drive then with some upgrades on it, and it's terrible to drive stock. The diff is poor, the weight distribution is all sorts of clucky, the engine is weird. It's just a weird thing to drive. You feel really high up, it's kind of big and cumbersome. It pretty much everything you don't want a car to drive like is the Ford F100. So naturally, if you fancy being stupid, if you want a challenge actually, try and build a racing one of these. I don't know, I'll reward you or something. Anyways, as on to the times, and the F100, despite being the worst handling car, was the quickest of the day, going to 376th place with a 1:43.052. The Honda S800 though is just behind it with a 1:43.308, which is pretty surprising considering the S800's power deficit compared to the F100. Now granted, the F100 weighs almost double what the S800 does, but still. Moving down the board some more, we sort of find the main bulk of today's episode. In 385th place, we have the Mercury Coupe with a 1:46.895, just missing out on a Fiat X19. Just underneath that, in 386th place, is the GMC Vandura with a 1:47.994. Actually, quite a gap between those cars, but there's nothing to fill that gap, so there you go. In 387th place, we find the Subaru BRAT GL with a 1:48.100, which does mean it beats out the Nissan Safari Turbo Diesel by 1.5 seconds, so I guess they're somewhat comparable. In 392nd place, we find the Ford Deluxe with a 1:51.575, just missing out on the 1932 model of the Ford Deluxe there. So, yeah, kind of interesting that that car would be slower than the 32, but there you go. And finally today, all the way down in 398th place, we find the Land Rover Series 3 with a 202.001. It goes slightly quicker than the Volkswagen Samba bus. It goes a second down on the Abarth 595 Assese. I will say, With the Land Rover, that is sort of to be expected just because it is at such of a power deficit. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching this edition of Forza Top Gear Laps. Next week, we are going to shift gears entirely as we take a look at a lot faster class of cars. We're going to be taking a look at the hypercars. Join me for that. Until then, farewell.